Recording live in the Lucky Number 7 Lounge, this is Dine, Drink Vegas, the podcast by and for everybody stuck at home, wishing they were in the land of neon lights and bad decisions. I'm your host, John, a.k.a. the Baller on a Budget, and you have stumbled across episode 42, Las Vegas Time Machine. We're also going to give you the drink of the day, an update on some changes coming to the podcast, and all the news that at least we thought was interesting. But before we could do any of that, we've got to bring in the founder of Dine, Drink, Travel himself. Of course, we mean the high roller, formerly of the High Plains, the king of comps, the leader in the luxury lounge, the Alabama slammer, the man who will soon be waiting for that limo to take him away, this time to the luxurious W Hotel and Casino. Of course, I mean Bill. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, John. How are you today?
I'm doing good, but it feels like deja vu because we just did an episode last week. But listeners, we're going to go to a weekly-ish format. Now, Bill and I lead busy lives, so it may not be truly weekly because, you know, stuff happens. But we're going to bring more content to you. It might mean slightly shorter episodes because there's less news, or it might mean we might actually turn into something like a real news podcast for Vegas travelers. Either way, we look forward to putting out more content. We hope you're looking forward to listening to more. Say, Bill, does that sound like a plan that meets your needs?
Well, that depends. While we record more podcasts, will you and I get to have more cocktails?
Yes, we will. And this week we're doing something a little bit different. So we've been doing summer-themed cocktails, and I've thrown a lot of tiki drinks at Bill. And Bill does not like having to get out the cocktail shakers and all of that. So we decided to do a mojito, but with a twist. This is a lemon basil mojito. Now, let me give you the rundown, and then we'll let Bill tell you what he thinks of it. You throw 5 to 6 basil leaves instead of mint leaves at the bottom of a tall glass, and then you muddle that together with a tablespoon of raw cane sugar, 2 ounces of rum, or 3 if you're feeling that way, an ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice, and after you've got that all muddled, add ice to the glass, top with whatever amount of club soda you want. It could be just a splash. It could be a fair bit, depending on how much you want to dilute and lengthen the drink. And then you can garnish that with lemon slices. And in my case, I went for a little extra basil leaf. Bill, did you make any variants on yours? And what did you think?
So I'm not going to lie. For once, I made mostly variants on this. Here's what happened. You, I think, texted me this drink 2 days ago, and I showed it to Rachel, my wife. She said, that looks yummy. So we've kind of spent the last 2 days working on this recipe. And what I wound up doing with it is I wound up getting some basil from our garden. And in addition to basil, I still added a little bit of mint to it, too. And the combination of both the basil and the mint worked really well. And I used simple syrup here because I figured that would dissolve better. But I took my basil and my mint, my simple syrup, a rather large amount of Captain Morgan rum, and rather than lemon juice, I cut up a lemon and put the lemon in there and tossed it for quite a while. It was phenomenal. I guess the other difference I made is, well, I certainly splashed it with soda, and I enjoy it very much as a mojito. I don't know that I don't enjoy this more as essentially like a lemon basil daiquiri, right? Like it personally, I prefer it without the club soda. And I know my wife indicated she prefers it without the club soda. So how important do you think the club soda is to this drink? Obviously, it's important if you want to call it a mojito. But if your goal is good cocktail, how important is the club soda, John?
I think it boils down to preference. For me, I do like the carbonation, but then I like carbonated beverages more than you do. You don't tend to drink a lot of rum and cokes or that sort of thing. And I really like the bubbles. I think it's refreshing. So yeah, I disagree with you, but I don't think it really matters. At the end of the day, drink it the way you want to drink it. Also,
well, and
I did not.
Yeah, it's one of those where there's a couple. I apologize. There's a couple of good choices. I guess one of my other questions: how good is the produce this time of year out in your part of Texas? And to be clear, I realize I should know that answer, as my wife, my child, and my property are all there. But, I've moved to a place where stuff grows out of the ground. I like it here. How good is the produce right now in far western Texas?
Well, you can't grow lemons and limes and citrus very successfully in our neck of the woods. However, HEB handles that by importing the finest citrus that you can grow in the Rio Grande Valley, which is hot and seasonable. So we have good access to produce all year long. There were no Meyer lemons. I would love to try this with Meyer lemon instead of regular lemon, but I never have a difficult time getting pretty decent citrus. Like certain varieties may not be around, but your basics, lemons, limes, mandarin oranges, navel oranges, we can get that all the time, and they're usually pretty good. It's a rare day that I get bad citrus.
So and fair, right? And that makes sense. We've got exceptionally good citrus, which grows right here. Like a couple of the ingredients I just went and got out of my garden. And I really like the choice of not putting lemon juice in there. I like the choice of putting in a lemon and some ice and just tossing it. At least in my case, particularly as I prefer this as basically a mojito, that worked. But I guess last question, what do you think about my choice to use both the basil, which is what the drink calls for, as well as the mint in the same drink?
I've never done it, but I would imagine it tastes pretty good. I've had the thought too of doing this with rosemary and gin, but I haven't done it yet.
That might be awesome. But no, so your notion of making complex cocktails is growing on me. Since we started recording this podcast more often a few months ago, I've now got multiple cocktail shakers. My family's here in town in Alabama for the summer. We were like having family cocktail hour. And the last couple of things we've made have been great for just like the sticky, unpleasant heat of an Alabama summer. This is, I guess, the second week in a row we've done a variant on what amounts to an Alabama porch lemonade, and I like it very, very much. Well played, John.
I am surprised that you went with Captain Morgan. I made mine tonight with one of your favorites with good old Don Q.
So we
I'm kind of surprised that you went with what you went with.
We can get that here. Here's the problem with ABC stores, the state-controlled liquor stores here. You can get the Don Q that you use, but you've got to drive a considerable distance from my home to get it. If you want liquor within 15 or 20 minutes of my house, you're going to a fairly basic liquor store, and you got's what you got. So it's not that you can't get the good stuff. I was just going for something that was easier to get. And would your upscale rum have been better? Yeah, of course it would have. The Captain was fine, particularly by the time I added sugar and lemon and basil and mint and ice and all of the things.
No, that makes sense. And I don't know that I think of Don Q as being upscale, but I do get it. You got what's on hand. And I'll be honest, I don't buy a lot of Captain Morgan or Bacardi, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're classics for a reason. I just happen to have a friend who's from Puerto Rico, and he's very big on you drink Don Q, and I like the guy, so I kind of roll with what he rolls out. But nothing wrong with the Captain. I've been known to rock with the Captain on many an occasion. I do think this is a cocktail where a silver rum is the way to go. I think a lighter
100%.
Flavored, lighter bodied rum. This is not like I eyeballed the Rum Fire, the 151 proof super funky Jamaican rum. I think that would have been the wrong call here. I think you just keep it simple with this one.
You absolutely do. But no, I enjoyed the drink. Well done. And this is something I hope they will serve us, or something, some variant of this around the pool when we go to the W over Labor Day.
I bet you they will. Well, let's jump into our main story. Now, listeners, I am going to point out as we go to a more frequent recording schedule, there may be weeks when we don't really do a feature. We may just jaw a little bit more about the news, but we do have a feature story this week, and I thought we'd have a little bit of fun. And I'm surprised that our answers were chronologically close together. We may do this down the road and see what we come up with a second time around, but here's our premise. Las Vegas Time Machine There are some magical moments in Las Vegas history that both of us missed out on, either because we were too young or it was before we were born, or it happened in our lifetime and we were either too busy, too broke, or both, or in my case, too hyper religious to go and enjoy Las Vegas. So, Bill, would you like to go first or do you want me to go first?
So I would like you to take the honors because this was your premise. And frankly, you've got a better story than I do. And I want to hear your story for a minute.
So I've been thinking about this for quite a while now. And I've got several Las Vegas time machine moments, but this one goes back to June 28th, 1997. Now, that particular summer, I was serving as a youth pastor in a very conservative church in a rural small community outside of Wichita Falls, Texas. And I was living in the converted semi-apartment attached to the house of some older church members. And I had ESPN, and that's about the only channel I had that was of interest to me. So I watched a lot of sports. I could not watch this event live. I had to wait for ESPN to break in with the news. But this blew my mind when it happened. Mike Tyson in his second fight with Evander Holyfield, and this would be the notorious ear fight. This would be the fight where Mike Tyson was frustrated. He wasn't doing well. We weren't used to seeing Mike struggle. And Mike decided to take a piece of Evander's ear with him. So, Bill, do you remember that fight? Were you sports conscious back in 1997?
I was sports conscious. I wasn't Las Vegas conscious. And I guess the reason that stands out to me is that's one of those moments which on the one hand could have happened anywhere in the world, but on the other hand, of course, it actually did happen in Las Vegas. Like, I was today years old before I actually realized that happened in Las Vegas, and now that you say it, it makes total sense.
Yeah, it really does. It makes you wonder if Mike had Vegased the evening before, to be honest. Some other things about this fight that stick out. There was a great undercard, lots of good fights. I've gone back and watched the entire broadcast since on the internet. Sometimes I'll just go watch classic sports. You even get a Julio Cesar Chavez fight back in 97 here. There was a really good bout between two female boxers. There were celebrities everywhere. ESPN and SportsCenter actually in their fight preview showed all the different celebrities that were there at the fight. And it was your normal cast of late 90s Brat Pack and hip hop artists, that kind of thing. And just at that moment in Las Vegas, I want the listeners to think about the moment we're in. In 1997, the Excalibur and the Luxor had been open for a while as part of Circus Circus Entertainment Group. Steve Wynn and Circus Circus had partnered on Monte Carlo, where they had a 50-50 ownership stake in Monte Carlo. And New York had just recently opened, and they were building the Bellagio. So you're in this moment where the south end of the Strip is taking place. You can kind of see in the architecture of the old Monte Carlo, now Park MGM, but especially when it was still the Monte Carlo, you can kind of see how the Bellagio is just a bigger, nicer, better version of Monte Carlo that was being built. So modern Vegas is rising up at this time, but there's a lot of vintage Vegas still open. Importantly, the Stardust is still a going concern. I think maybe the Dunes or the Sands, whichever one is now Venetian, that was still up and going. Dunes was already gone. But there were some of these classic properties. The Flamingo hadn't been renovated into its current iteration yet. Caesar's Palace wasn't quite as big as it is now. So it was this magical moment where there was old and new Vegas happening at the same time. And the Fremont Street experience was less than 2 years old. So downtown was way sketchier in 1997 than it is now. But it was on its way back from being truly run down in the late 80s and early 90s. I would love to be in Vegas, not just for this fight, but for one day either side of it, to really soak in that turning point. Because I feel like you're just right at the turning of the tide of what Vegas was and what it would become. And I think that's sort of a magical thing.
Well, and also I would have loved hearing the conversations in every bar, because people wouldn't have been able to look on the phones in their pockets. That wasn't a thing yet.
No.
And there would be a whole lot of people walking around like, did he just bite his ear? Like, there would have been confusion about what happened for a while as people tried to process, like, that's not how a boxing match is supposed to go.
Right. And I had no friends in this little town at the time. No cell phone, so I couldn't call anybody. I couldn't text anybody. I do remember the next day when I went somewhere my office, I guess, where I had internet connection, where I could email friends about the fight, right? And for those responses, I would have given anything to have been in a sports bar for this. Are you kidding? Because it was just this moment. I think I remember exclaiming, "Holy shit," which deeply offended the very elderly, very uptight Christian couple I was living with at the time. And I know they told people because I got the stink eye at church. So I know, it was just one of those things. I think there's some other. We'll do this segment again. There's some other. To be fair,
though,
but
you and I used to go to the same church, and you've gotten the stink eye at church from me when I'm like, "Come on, John, we've got lunch reservations. This is taking a little bit long."
Well, that's true. That's true. I finally hung up the preaching robes because apparently I talk too much. But hey, now I'm just an old guy with a podcast, so some things never change.
That is outstanding. Go ahead.
I found interesting is your choice was not that far apart from mine chronologically. So why don't you tell us about your time machine moment?
So let's talk about the chronology of it for a second, because two different things were happening at that point in time. One, Vegas was, as you pointed out, changing, right? Like, this was a significant moment in the evolution of Vegas. The other thing was, you and I had just crossed into adulthood right at this point in time. While both of us were broke and we couldn't have imagined committing the great sin of going to Vegas at that point in our lives, even if we had had the money, we were starting to pay attention to the world as adults. So I think that explains part of it. But mine is, I'm going to go back on type. Last week, I went off type as the leader in the luxury lounge, and this week I'm 100% back in. And I'm going to say, if I could go back for one event in Vegas history, I would go back for the opening night of the Bellagio, which, when was that, John? 1998, give or take?
Yeah, just maybe 6 months after this fight.
Yeah, no. And the reason I would go back to opening night of the Bellagio is for several. One is Steve Wynn had been a force in Vegas for a while, but the Bellagio was effectively his move into upscale. And after the Bellagio is when he started doing things like, the Wynn and things like that. But the Bellagio is when he moves into upscale. And frankly, that's the moment when Vegas really moves into upscale. And you and I talked about this on the episode last week. Vegas may have over upscaled. Like, there may not be enough mid-market stuff anymore. But I would have loved to have been there for that transformation. I would have loved to have been there as people walked through the beautiful floral gardens and the huge casino with the luxurious carpets and all of that. The other thing is that in addition to the hotel itself, which I love, the Bellagio has a lot of my other favorite spaces in Vegas. For example, they have Le Cirque, which opened with the Bellagio. And if I'm there for the opening night of the Bellagio, I'm probably there for the opening night of Le Cirque. Now, to be clear, yes, Le Cirque existed in New York before then, but that's in New York, and that's not a place I go very often. I'm in Alabama. It may not even be legal for me to go to New York. I don't know. The other thing is that the buffet, which opened at the Bellagio, which is still very, very good, for a while was the standard. For a good decade after that was the standard on what constitutes a premium buffet. It should say something about Vegas that we're now in a world where everybody goes to the Bellagio buffet and you're like, it was fine, right? Because our standards have leapfrogged so far. But if you're used to going to whatever your neighborhood country kitchen meat and three is, the Bellagio buffet is to this day a phenomenal experience. And I guess the last thing that makes me miss or wish I had been around for the opening night of the Bellagio is while it was the start of an era, if I've got my chronology right, it was also the end of an era. It was the last great free show on the Strip. You used to have things like the Treasure Island Pirate Show or the Mirage Volcano or the whatever the thing happened to be. And when the Bellagio opened, they kept that theme with their huge water fountains and their huge water shows. And they've still got it going on today. After the Bellagio, people quit doing that. And it's not that they don't have lovely properties. They do. It's just that none of the new hotels think it's their job to provide free entertainment for people walking past them on the Strip. So yeah, I wish I was there for the opening night of the Bellagio.
I love that answer. And Bill, I want to touch on that last theme. So, because you and I haven't talked about this offline, so I've got a breaking show plans for you. And brainstorming some future episodes. I want to talk about a few of those things you've highlighted. I want to talk about the generic corporate casinos that are being built versus the theme era. So not just the high market to mid market, but the more interactive experience, the more let's entertain the crowd, all of that kind of thing that has faded on the Strip, and what our thoughts about that are. I also at some point want us to do a deep dive. We're going to do a series on Las Vegas legends. Now, Steve Wynn is a complicated figure with an awful lot of history, and the end of the story is not pretty. But we're going to do some stories on Vegas legends, and I do want to burn an episode talking about Steve Wynn. So we're going to treat those as teasers for future episodes. But for now, Bill, why don't you bring us our first news story?
Well, before we do one last thing, if we're going to do Vegas legends, can we please, sir, for the love of all that is good and holy, do an episode on His Honor, Oscar Goodman?
Oh, without a doubt. That probably will be first. And then I don't know where we go on the others. We're going to wind up with some of the great mobsters, with developers like Steve Wynn, probably talk about Jonathan Jostle down at the Plaza. And knowing me, I'll throw in Fat Elvis for fun. So, awesome. And we might actually talk about the real Elvis, Wayne Newton. Lots of candidates out there. I think His Honor and Mrs. Her Honor are worthy inclusions in the Legend series, and we may open with them at a future date. Don't think that'll be the next episode. We'll get to them at some point down the road.
We will get to them, but right now we should, as you point out, get to the news. And I'm going to start with a story that I initially found on the website moneywise.com, although it's consistent with the other reporting that we've done over the last month or so on this podcast. And according to moneywise.com, Las Vegas casino dealers are quietly being laid off due to a decline in tourism. Now, one of the things I appreciated about this story is it had some of the nuances. It noted, for example, that convention attendance in Vegas is actually up 10% so far this year. But overall tourism is down, and in particular, international arrivals are down sharply. So folks, we've talked about the last three episodes, but if you've got an existing trip, it's worth repricing to see if you can get a new deal. Please make sure you don't lose your existing price while you do that. Yay, fun times for the story that I've got. But yeah, it'd be worth repricing a trip. If you couldn't afford it 2 months ago, I would check again. And folks, be decent to the people who are working hard for you. They depend on your tips. And in particular, they're going to do that more now because there are fewer people going to Vegas. John, does this story ring true to you with everything else that you've seen going on in Vegas over the last couple of months?
Well, I haven't been in person, so just tracking the data and the videos that people post. Yeah, it seems like people are going there less just to go there and more for a purpose. But I'm guessing that as it's less full, I'm guessing some of these conventions are probably getting a pretty good deal. And listen, if I've got to go to some kind of convention or seminar or whatever, I will take Vegas at its worst over, I don't know, Kansas City at its best.
100%.
So, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense to me.
It absolutely makes sense. What else is going on, John?
Well, last week we talked about some of the most famous butts in the history of Las Vegas. Now we're going to talk about some other curvaceous things. According to Las Vegas News 3 and every other outlet that's out there, Dolly Parton is going to be doing a residency at Caesars in December. And this is going to line up with National Finals Rodeo, which, you know, is a legendary event that draws a whole lot of cowboys and cowgirls every year to Las Vegas, including our buddy Zero. So, Bill, what do you think? If you're in town, are you buying tickets to see Miss Dolly?
So, NFR is one of the great events in Vegas. I'm going to give a qualified yes. I would love to do it. If I possibly could, I would show up. My guess is that that's going to be out of my price range. I will be shocked if I can find a ticket for less than $500. And my guess is it's going to be closer to $1,000. So would I go 100%? I don't know what my upper price limit is. I'm pretty sure this event is going to exceed that. I will say, though, folks, if you have never been there for a National Finals Rodeo, I would absolutely go. It is a great time to go to Vegas, particularly if you are into country music even a little bit. But if you're not, cool, right? Like, that is a great choice. The athletes who do that work at National Finals Rodeo are some impressive human beings. And ladies and gentlemen, you and I cannot do those things.
Yeah, that's true. And I will say, before we get off the topic of Dolly Parton, I will point out with Miss Dolly that two things happened in the early 80s when I was nearing the age of 10, within a year of one another. One was the debut of the movie The Best Little Whorehouse on Texas, which I did not see in the theaters because my parents obviously didn't take me to a movie like that, but I did see it rerun on TV multiple times. And two was Return of the Jedi. And I don't know which one jump-started puberty for little John more, Dolly Parton's outfit in that movie or Princess Leia in the gold bikini. This is where my inner redneck and my inner geek fight with one another. But I'm just throwing that little piece of my personal history out there. Anyway, speaking of dreams and fantasies, Vital Vegas says the next story isn't going to actually come to fruition. Why don't you tell us what it is?
It is that the A's had a groundbreaking on Monday. And to be fair, the A's, who are currently of Sacramento and were previously of where were they from, John? Why did I just Oakland? Thank you very much. Yeah, the Oakland A's, who are now the Sacramento A's, who are in the process of becoming the Las Vegas A's. They do have some very real problems, and they haven't come up with all the financing for their stadium. But gosh, there are a whole lot of markers to have happened at this point for Major League Baseball to not let it happen. And frankly, at this point, I think it probably does eventually. Worst case, it is a different ownership group. But me as a fan, I don't care who owns the team. I want my baseball games. But that then begs the question, John, because that story wasn't just from Scott at Vital Vegas. That story was all over the internet. And I feel bad. We haven't properly quoted our friend Scott over at Vital Vegas yet. Does he have any news stories that we should probably share with our listeners?
I'm going to hold there real quick, and I want to jump back to something you said about the A's and why I think ultimately Scott at Vital Vegas is wrong about the A's coming to town. I know that A's ownership may not come up with the money, but Major League Baseball itself is now committed to this, and we have seen sports leagues carry ownership groups across the finish line or squeeze them out of the league to find somebody who can get the job done. I don't think MLB will put up with the egg on their face for this to fall through. So I think your comment about it may not be this ownership group is true. I am convinced they come to Las Vegas, and I am convinced they come to this location because it's now in the league's best interest. The other owners are not going to let this man ruin what is a bonanza for the entirety of the league. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They're going to get this done. Okay. So, Scott, if you happen to listen to this episode, you're still my favorite. I just think you're wrong on this one. Moving on, Scott at Vital Vegas has shared a rumor that the owners of Carbone over at the Aria and Sadel's at Bellagio may be bringing a new concept called Carbone Vogale to the former Picasso space at Bellagio. And this is based on the fact that they registered a web domain for Carbone Vogale, and probably know it's Scott because, you know, some busboy, mid-management person at Bellagio or waitress gave him tips, because that happens for him quite a bit. But he did note that there's also a recipe, a rumor of a seafood restaurant coming in, and that having to do with a little floating barge that they're building there. It might make sense to do seafood instead. So, Bill, what do you think? What would you like to see in that Picasso space?
So I don't much care what goes in there. It's just such a pretty space that inevitably something is going there. Honestly, in a perfect world, Le Cirque would move down there, so they've got a slightly better piece of real estate, but they've decided to price themselves out of the market. So whatever it is, I will probably go once because it will be beautiful, and only once because that's what I'm going to be able to afford.
No, yeah, that makes sense to me. Makes a lot of sense. The last one we're going to take from Scott is he is telling us that, well, Misbehaves Mavericks, the variety show at Plaza that has moved to several locations around town, it's going on hiatus. Scott thinks that their time at Plaza is probably up. I'm bummed out by this. I really want to see this show, and I really like that showroom at Plaza. If this is true, I hope Jonathan Jostle and the fine folks at Plaza will find something else to go into that theater space. You and I did March Madness there one year. It's a great room. There ought to be entertainment happening in that space.
There should absolutely be entertainment happening in that space. And having some kind of a show somewhere is going to be important to making it making downtown a real destination, because most of the people who go downtown aren't going for shows, but that's not the same as none of them, right? Like, you've got to have that as one of the choices on the menu, or else all your high-end traffic is going to wind up leaving and going down to the Strip, which is expressly what you're trying to avoid. And our last, yes.
Oh, well, hold on. I will add, because I didn't put this on the run sheet, and I do apologize. One, ticket sales for this have been good. So there is a crowd in there. So if this may be a personality conflict or drama behind the scenes, but two, Jonathan Jostle did talk about in an episode of On the Corner of Main Street, which is the Plaza's podcast, that they are changing up the live music at the Sand Dollar Lounge because they have focused on local independent rock bands. I've been in there a couple of nights when there's live music. It is kind of a crapshoot whether or not it is my thing. Every band I've heard in there has been talented, but they weren't necessarily my jam. I think that makes sense at the original Sand Dollar, which is a locals place. But for the version of the Sand Dollar that is located in a tourist area, in this case downtown, you probably need cover bands and nostalgia acts, something that's more approachable for tourists, more familiar for tourists. I think they need bands you can sing along to, which is not what the Sand Dollar normally does. So I do know the Plaza is committed to having entertainment in their building. They're going to try to make it more tourist friendly for all the reasons you just brought out. The music that's going to be inside Sand Dollar is going to change. I hope that does mean something's coming into the room. All right, Bill, last story is all you.
So, Bottle Blonde, which is Gwen Stefani's 3-story bar, is opening at the Grand Bazaar shops at the Horseshoe on June the 26th, which, as we record this, is tomorrow. But as listeners listen to this, may have already passed. It is going to be right next to Blake Shelton's Old Red. Of course, Gwen Stefani and Blake Shelton are married. I am kind of curious about the strategy of co-locating those, because those are two very different crowds of people, and it's not like the two principals are going to be there all that often. But you know what? I'm not going to go out of my way to go there, but I'm also not going to go out of my way to avoid it. I don't know that we don't maybe make a stop through both of those bars and check them out. John, how do you feel about this bar opening?
I feel exactly the same way. If we're going to get some rock and pop and it's almost like the Osmonds. They're a little bit country. They're a little bit rock and roll. I don't mind getting my wires crossed because I happen to be a fan of just about every genre of music.
Do you like both kinds, both country and Western?
Country and Western. Yes, I do. I also love the Blues Brothers, and I may have to watch that movie tonight now. Yeah, I think I want to check this out, and I do want to go have a drink at Old Red as well. The last time I was in town, it was open, and I walked by, but I didn't go in. So, yeah, I think I would check both of these out just to check out what the vibes are like and see whether either or both is my speed. I'm curious.
I am as well. Well, what else do we have, John?
That really is it. Yeah, Bill, that's all I got, other than I was about to make a really bad joke about how I used to stalk Gwen Stefani, called her all the time, but she had an answering machine that says she was walking into spider webs. I guess she's no holler back girl. But that's bananas, and I'm not going to do that. Anyway, on that note, let's mercifully put this episode to bed by you, Bill, telling everybody what they can find of our content on other platforms. And God, that was awkwardly stated.
It was, but that's how we roll, yo. You can find us on YouTube at Dine Drink Vegas, where we tend to have short and focused videos, which help you plan your next trip. Right now, we are in the middle of a series about the Wynn Hotel, and we are about to release a series about the Mandalay Bay. You can also find us on YouTube at Dine Drink Travel if what you're interested in is air travel as well as executive lounges, and you can find us on essentially every social media platform at Dine Drink Travel. John, where can they find you?
Over on X, I'm at Dine Drink John, and I will usually be griping about the fact that I'm not yet in Vegas or retweeting whatever Scott said because I'm a mindless sheep. That's it for this show. We are so glad you decided to listen to us, and we thank you for that. If you have friends that are really into Las Vegas and you want to help them plan their next trip, please share a link to our podcast. If you have enemies that hate listening to fat, white, old Southern guys podcast about anything, share the link with them too. Either way, you're helping us grow an audience, and we really appreciate that. And until the next episode, happy travels.